I'm 68 years old, and for 4 decades I've been bringing food to the same cove on the northern California coast where creatures the world believes are myths have been waiting for me. My name is David Carpenter, and until last spring, I thought I understood why they came. I was wrong. What they finally trusted me enough to reveal about humanity's past has kept me awake every night since. I live alone in a small house 3 miles north of Point Reyes Station, the same house where I grew up as the son of a lighthouse keeper. The cove is a 15-minute walk down a trail that only I use anymore. Most mornings, I'm there by 5:30 a.m., carrying a cooler with fresh fish. I've made this walk 14,600 times, give or take a few hundred for illness or travel. Each time they've been there, waiting in the water between the rocks. There are 3 of them, or there were 3. I'll explain that later. People who know me think I'm a retired marine biologist who likes solitary beach walks. That part is true. What they don't know is that my entire career in marine biology was built around a secret I could never share. Every paper I published on marine mammal behavior, every grant I wrote about coastal ecosystems, all of it was a cover for the real research I was doing, the research I could never publish. This is the complete story. I'm telling it now because I'm old, because they asked me to, and because staying silent has become harder than speaking. I was 16 in January 1976 when I first saw her. My father, Robert Carpenter, had been the lighthouse keeper at Point Reyes for 11 years. We lived in the keeper's quarters, a 2-story house attached to the lighthouse itself. My mother had left when I was 9, unable to handle the isolation. It was just my father and me, the beam rotating above us every night, the Pacific stretching out forever. Winter storms hit the point hard that year. On January 23rd, we got 70-mile-per-hour winds and 15-foot swells. My father had me help him secure equipment and check the generator. The storm hit around 9 p.m. I remember standing at the gallery windows, watching waves explode against the rocks below. The lighthouse beam cut through the rain and spray every 15 seconds. That's when I heard it. A sound that shouldn't have been possible in that wind. Singing, not words, but a melody that somehow carried over the storm noise. I pressed my face against the cold glass, trying to see anything in the chaos below. My father was in the watchroom, monitoring the beacon. I grabbed his binoculars from the shelf. It took me 3 rotations of the beam to find her. She was clinging to a rock about 40 yards from the cliff base, in a small cove that was partially sheltered from the worst of the waves. During the brief moments of light, I saw her clearly. A woman's face and torso, pale. Why they hid. Why they were so careful. Why there were so few of them. Now I knew, and the knowing was worse than the mystery had been. They didn't come back for 3 days. I returned to the cove every morning with fish, sat on the rock, waited. The water remained empty. On the 3rd day, April 20th, I noticed that C still hadn't appeared since before my birthday. I went through my log when I got home. His last confirmed sighting was April 9th. 11 days. On April 21st, A returned alone. She surfaced in the middle of the cove, watching me. I threw fish. She took them but didn't come close. She ate quickly and left. The interaction lasted less than 5 minutes. April 22nd, same pattern. A alone, maintaining distance, leaving quickly. No communication attempts, no drawings. April 23rd, D appeared with A. They both came closer, back to the normal feeding distance. I threw fish to both of them. They ate, and then A swam to the north side of the cove where a small strip of sand was exposed at low tide. She pulled herself onto the sand, fully out of the water for the first time I'd ever witnessed. I stood up from my rock. She made a sharp sound, and I sat back down. Message received. I could watch, but I couldn't approach. She began to draw again, this time in the wet sand where the markings would last longer. She drew more carefully than she had on the rock, taking her time with each image. D stayed in the water, watching both of us. The first drawing was a map, crude but recognizable, a coastline with bays and inlets. She drew several X marks along the coast, then she drew mer figures at each X location. Many mer figures, her drawing suggested dozens at each site. She was showing me population centers, where her people had lived. Next to this map, she drew a different image. human settlements along the same coast, ships in the water. She drew lines connecting the human settlements to the mer population sites. Contact. Interaction between the two species. Then she drew what came next. Human figures with nets, with spears, with clubs. She drew mer figures being pulled from the water. She drew them in cages. She drew them being transported on ships. One detailed image showed a mer figure in what looked like a tank or large container, surrounded by human figures who were just watching. Spectacle, entertainment. She moved to a new section of sand. This drawing showed an indoor space. She drew it carefully: walls, a ceiling, tables, human figures around the table, a mer figure on the table, restrained. She drew tools in the human figure's hands. She drew the mer figure being opened, being studied. Her hand moved more aggressively here, carving deeper lines in the sand. I felt sick. I was watching her describe systematic hunting, capture, and vivisection of her species by mine. She kept going. More drawings. Mer figures trying to escape, some successful, fleeing to deeper water. Others caught. She drew fewer mer figures in each successive image. A population declining, being decimated. Then she drew something different, a gathering of mer figures, the survivors, in deep water far from shore. She drew them making a decision. The image showed them turning away from the coast, swimming toward open ocean. Retreat, complete withdrawal from human contact. The final drawing in this sequence showed scattered small groups in isolated locations. She drew mountains or cliffs around each group, indicating protective geography. Hidden populations. She pointed at the cove around us, then at one of these isolated groups in her drawing. "This is where we are," she was saying. "This is what became of us." I slid back into the water. The drawings remained in the sand. Dee approached the beach, looked at the drawings, then looked at me. She made a sound, softer than A's vocalizations. Sadder. If I could interpret emotion in a sound. I swam to the center of the cove. She floated there, vertical in the water, and began a different kind of communication. She pointed at herself, then held up one hand with 3 fingers extended. Then she pointed at D and held up 2 fingers. Then she pointed at F, who I realized was watching from the kelp beds, and held up 1 finger. Generations. She was telling me there were 3 generations here. Her daughter, or the one she'd raised, and the grandchild. Then she held up one hand, all 5 fingers spread. She closed the hand into a fist, then opened it and held up just 2 fingers. I didn't understand at first. She repeated it. 5 fingers. Close them. Open to 2 fingers. 5 became 2. A population reduced from 5 to 2. She was telling me that others had been here before, and now they were gone. The group had shrunk. She pointed at the ocean beyond the cove entrance, made a sweeping gesture. Then she held up both hands, fingers spread. 10. She pointed at herself. D, F, 3. She held up 7 fingers, then made a gesture of scattering, dispersing. 7 others. Hands bit into it and ate it raw while floating there. Her teeth were sharp, visible when she bit down. Not fangs, but definitely not human teeth. When she finished, she looked at me and made a sound. A single note, mid-range, that echoed slightly off the rocks. I tossed the second fish. Same result. Then the third. After the third fish, she stayed longer than usual. She swam slowly around the cove, never taking her eyes off me, showing me her full body for the first time in daylight. The tail extended at least 6 feet from where her waist ended. It was covered in overlapping scales, each one about the size of my palm. The tail fin was horizontal, like a whale's, but the shape was different, more angular, with defined edges. She used it with precision, small movements that kept her position steady in the current. Then she was gone, diving down and disappearing into the kelp. I walked back up the cliff trail in a daze. I just fed something that didn't exist, and I knew I would do it again. I stole fish from my father's catch 3 times a week for the next month. He noticed but didn't say anything. The runs had been good that winter, and he probably assumed I was eating them myself or sharing with friends from school. I wasn't. Every fish went to the cove. By March, the pattern was established. I would arrive at dawn, usually around 6 a.m. She would appear within 10 minutes. I would toss fish into the water, usually 3 or 4 depending on what I had. She would eat them, swim around the cove for a while, then leave. We never got closer than 15 feet apart. On March 12, 2 others appeared with her. The second female was smaller, younger looking, with lighter coloring. Her scales were more gray than green. The male was larger than both of them, with broader shoulders and a darker tail that was almost brown. He stayed farther back, watching from near the channel entrance, while the first female came forward for the fish. I'd brought 6 rockfish that morning. It wasn't enough. I threw what I had, and they shared it, the younger female eating last. The next morning, I brought 12. That became the new standard. 12 fish, 3 times a week, every week. I graduated high school in June 1976. My father expected me to leave for college. I'd been accepted to UC Santa Cruz with a partial scholarship. Instead, I told him I was taking a year off to work and save money. The truth was, I couldn't leave the cove. I got a job at a marina in Point Reyes Station, cleaning boats and doing maintenance. The owner, a man named Ed Morris, let me buy fish from the commercial boats that came in. I told him I was feeding a seal colony. He never questioned it. The feedings continued through summer. I learned their individual behaviors. The first female, the one I'd seen in the storm, was the boldest. She would sometimes surface right next to the rock where I sat, close enough that I could see the texture of her skin, the way her hair moved in the water. The younger female was curious but cautious. She would approach the fish quickly, but she always retreated immediately after taking one. The male never came closer than 30 feet. He would take the fish I threw to the back of the cove, but he watched me constantly. His eyes never left me while I was there. By August, I'd been feeding them for 6 months. On August 19th, I made a mistake. I brought my father's camera, a Nikon F2 he'd bought the year before. I thought if I could just get one photograph, just one piece of proof, I could start to understand what I was dealing with. I could research, find others who might have seen them, learn what they were. The first female surfaced as usual. I had the camera around my neck, still in its case. I threw the first 2 fish, and she ate them. Then I slowly, carefully, lifted the camera and brought it to my eye. She saw the movement. Her head snapped toward me, and her expression changed. I don't know how else to describe it. Something in her face registered threat, recognition of danger. She made a sharp, high-pitched sound, and all 3 of them vanished underwater. I waited for 2 hours. They didn't come back. I returned the next morning with fish, but no camera. The cove was empty. I came back every morning for 2 weeks. On September 4th, they finally reappeared. The first female surfaced, but she stayed 40 feet away at the far edge of the cove. She wouldn't come closer. I threw the fish as far as I could, and she retrieved them from a distance. The other 2 stayed underwater. I could see their shapes moving in the kelp, but they didn't surface. It took 3 months for her to trust me enough to return to the old distance. 3 months of daily visits, of bringing fish, of never making sudden movements, of keeping my hands visible and empty of anything except food. By December, we were back to the original pattern. I never brought a camera again. I started college at UC Santa Cruz in September 1977, a year late. I declared my major as marine biology within the first month. My professors thought I was exceptionally motivated. They had no idea that everything I was learning, I was testing in the cove. I drove home every weekend, a 3-hour trip each way. Friday nights and Monday mornings I fed them. During the week, my father took over. I'd told him everything in November 1976, after he found me carrying a cooler of fish down the trail at 5 a.m. He'd been angry at first, then concerned I was having a breakdown. Then I took him to the cove, and they appeared. He stood next to me on the rocks, completely silent, while all 3 of them surfaced and ate the fish I threw. Afterward, walking back up the trail, he didn't speak until we reached the top. Then he said, "You tell no one. You understand me?" No one. I understood. He fed them Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday while I was at school. I took Sunday, Monday, and Friday. We developed a system. We kept a log, noting what time they appeared, how long they stayed, any changes in behavior. We never wrote down what they were. The log just said colony, and used initials. A for the first female, B for the younger one, C for the male. Through my coursework, I learned to be more systematic. I started noting water temperature, tide schedules, moon phases. I recorded what species of fish they preferred. They ate rockfish, salmon, and lingcod readily. They refused mackerel and sardines. They wouldn't touch anything frozen, even after it thawed. It had to be fresh, ideally caught within the last 24 hours. I learned the rules through trial and error. Rule 1. Come alone. The one time I brought a friend from college, telling him we were checking tide pools, they didn't appear. Rule 2. No cameras, no recording devices of any kind. Rule 3. No sudden movements, no attempts to touch them, no coming closer than the rock where we always sat. Rule 4. Dawn or dusk only. I tried coming at midday once, the cove was empty. Rule 5. Consistency. If we missed a feeding without warning, they would be visibly agitated the next time, staying farther back, leaving faster. In spring 1979, during my sophomore year, I started experimenting with communication. I would make the same gesture each time before throwing a fish. A simple wave, raising my right hand, palm out. After 6 weeks, the first female started responding. She would raise her own hand out of the water, mimicking the gesture. Before I threw the fish, it was deliberate, intentional imitation. I tried other gestures, pointing to them, then to the fish, then tossing it. Within a month, she understood the sequence. If I pointed to her specifically, she would come forward for that fish. If I pointed to the younger female or the male, I could direct which one received it. They were learning a basic grammar of interaction with me. By my senior year, I was taking every marine biology course the university offered. Cetacean behavior, fish ecology, invertebrate zoology, biological oceanography. I wrote my senior thesis on communication patterns in marine mammals, using dolphins and orcas as my official subjects. Everything I was actually learning came from the Cove. I graduated in May 1981. I applied to graduate programs and was accepted to Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego. My father was 62 and starting to talk about retirement. The lighthouse was being automated. Within 2 years, there would be no keeper position at all. I told Scripps I was deferring for a year. I stayed at Point Reyes. That year, 1981 to 1982, I fed them almost every day. My father taught me everything he knew about weather patterns, about reading the ocean, about surviving on the coast. And I watched them. I filled notebooks with observations. The way they moved, the sounds they made, their social structure. The first female was clearly dominant. The others deferred to her, waiting for her to eat first, following her lead on whether to approach or retreat. In October 1981, something changed. The younger female didn't appear for 3 weeks. When she returned in early November, her body shape was different, thicker through the middle. By January, it was obvious. She was pregnant. The younger female gave birth sometime in March 1982. I didn't witness it. She simply disappeared for 4 days, then returned without the thickened body shape. 2 weeks later, she brought the infant to the cove. It was tiny, maybe 2 feet long, pale gray all over. The tail was disproportionately small, underdeveloped. It stayed pressed against its mother's side, moving when she moved. She was protective in a way I hadn't seen before. She wouldn't come close to the rocks at all. She stayed at the far edge of the cove, and when I threw fish toward her, she would snatch them quickly and retreat. The infant grew fast. By June, it was nearly 3 feet long and swimming independently for short bursts, though it always returned to its mother. By August, it was taking fish directly from the water on its own, though the mother would guide it, showing it how to approach and grab. I watched that infant grow up. I gave up my spot at Scripps and took a job as a research assistant at the University of California's Marine Lab in Bodega Bay, 40 minutes south of Point Reyes. The work was mundane, tagging fish, collecting water samples, maintaining equipment, but it paid enough, and the schedule was flexible. I could still make the dawn feedings. My father retired in September 1983, when the lighthouse was fully automated. He moved to Sacramento to be near his sister. Before he left, he made me promise to keep the feedings going. They depend on it now, he said. You took that responsibility when you started this. You don't stop. I didn't stop. Through the 1,980 seconds, through the 1,990 seconds, through my entire adult life, I fed them. I got a doctorate eventually, from UC Davis, finishing in 1989. My dissertation was on territorial behavior in harbor seals, respectable, publishable, completely mundane. I became Dr. Carpenter. I got teaching positions, research grants, published papers in marine biology journals. None of it mentioned what I actually spent my time studying. The infant from 1982, I started calling her D in the log, reached full size by 1987. She was nearly as large as her mother, the younger female, B. In 1991, D had her own infant. The male, C, was the father of both offspring as far as I could determine. Their social structure appeared to be a family unit. A, the dominant female, was likely C's mate as well, though I never saw evidence of her producing offspring. I learned to read their moods, their health, their stresses. In 1989, A had a long scar across her left shoulder that took months to heal. Something had injured her badly. She was slower in the water for half a year. In 1995, C disappeared for 3 months. When he returned, he had scars across his tail and back, deep gouges that looked like they'd come from something with teeth. They were living in an ocean that was trying to kill them. I could see it in the small ways. The fishing nets that sometimes drifted into the cove, which I would pull out and cut apart. The trash that accumulated in the kelp beds, which I cleared every week. The times when they appeared with visible injuries from unknown sources. The summers when the water temperature spiked and they would stay away for days, presumably going deeper or farther out where it was cooler. I bought the house I'd grown up in from the National Park Service in 1996 when they sold off the old lighthouse keeper's quarters. I was 46 years old, unmarried, living alone in my childhood home, walking to a secret cove every morning before dawn to feed creatures that didn't exist. People in Point Reyes Station thought I was eccentric. They had no idea. The infant, born in 1991, E in the log, matured and had her own offspring in 2004. 3 generations that I'd watched grow up. I was feeding the grandchild of the infant I'd first seen 22 years earlier. The family was growing, but slowly. Too slowly. Only 3 births in 28 years that survived to maturity. And the ocean kept getting warmer. The storms kept getting stronger. The nets kept appearing. I started noticing other changes around 2010. They were more cautious, more skittish. They wouldn't come as close as they used to. A, who had been bold enough to surface right next to my rock in the early years, now stayed 20 feet back minimum. They would leave faster if they heard any sound from the cliff trail above, any noise that might indicate another person. In 2015, E disappeared, just gone. She didn't come back. Her offspring, who was 11 years old at that point, stayed with the group. But E was gone, and I never learned what happened to her. The family unit was down to 5, A, B, C, D, and E's offspring, who I labeled F. B died in 2018. I found her body wedged between rocks at the north end of the cove after a storm. She was old. I'd been feeding her for 42 years at that point. I pulled her body out and buried it above the tide line, in a spot where she wouldn't be found. She was the first one I'd lost to natural causes that I was certain of. The remaining 4 continued the pattern. C was slowing down. He was at least as old as B had been, possibly older. A was still dominant, still the first to approach, but she was aging too. I could see it in the way she moved, less fluid than she'd been in the 1,980 seconds. D was the youngest of the original group now, in what I guessed was her early 40s based on when she was born. F was only 19, still learning, still growing. Then came April 2024, the morning that changed everything, April 17th, 2024. I remember the date because it was my birthday, 68 years old. The fog was thick that morning, rolling in from the ocean so dense I could barely see 10 feet ahead on the trail down. I had 12 rockfish in the cooler, fresh from the marina, bought the afternoon before. I reached the cove at 5:47 a.m. The fog made everything feel closer, more enclosed. I could hear the water moving in the channel but couldn't see it clearly. I sat on my usual rock and waited. The fog would lift once the sun got higher. A surfaced first, as always, but she didn't stay at her normal distance. She came closer than she had in years, within 10 feet of the rock. Close enough that I could see her face clearly even through the fog. She was watching me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. I threw the first fish. She didn't take it. It floated on the surface between us. She made a sound, a series of clicks and whistles that lasted maybe 5 seconds. It was deliberate, patterned. She'd made sounds before, but never anything this complex, this structured. I didn't move. I'd learned decades ago that when they did something unusual, the best response was to wait and observe. She repeated the sound sequence, exactly the same pattern. Then she swam even closer, within 6 feet. I could see the scars on her shoulders clearly now, old white lines against the gray-green of her skin. New scars too, fresher ones across her collarbone area. She reached up with one hand and touched her own shoulder, tracing one of the old scars with a webbed finger. Then she pointed at me. I didn't understand. She repeated the gesture. Touch the scar, point at me. Touch the scar, point at me. Her eyes never left mine. There was something in her expression that I can only describe as urgency. Then she dove under. I thought she was leaving. Instead, she came back up even closer, right at the edge of the rock, close enough that I could have reached out and touched her if I'd tried. She pulled herself partially onto the rocks, her tail still in the water, her upper body propped on her arms. The effort was visible. She was breathing harder, her shoulders rising and falling. She looked at me one more time, making sure I was watching. Then she began to draw. The rock surface was wet from the fog and spray. She used one finger to trace lines in the water film. Simple shapes at first. A circle, then smaller circles inside it. She pointed at the ocean, then back at the drawing. I understood that part. The ocean, and something in it. Next, she drew stick figures. Crude, basic human shapes. 4 of them standing at the edge of the large circle. They were holding long objects, spears maybe, or poles. She drew lines from the objects pointing down into the water. Then she drew different figures in the water. The proportions were different. Longer bodies, the lower half extended. Her people, she kept drawing. The human figures with spears surrounded the mer figures. Lines connected them. She drew the mer figures being pulled upward, toward the human figures. One of the mer figures was separated from the others, surrounded by human figures. She drew a line across its tail section, then made a cutting gesture with her hand. My chest felt tight. I was watching her draw a hunting scene, humans hunting her people. She wasn't finished. She drew more. A structure on land, rectangular, with bars. Human figures standing around it. A mer figure inside the structure. She drew the mer figure lying down, not moving. Dead, I realized. She was showing me captivity and death. The fog was starting to lift. More light came into the cove. She drew faster, like she knew her time was limited. More scenes, different scenarios, but always the same elements. Human figures, mer figures, violence, capture, death. Then she drew something that made me go cold. She drew a mer figure's body separated into pieces. Clinical, deliberate separation. Human figures around it, examining it. She looked at me to make sure I understood, then made a cutting gesture again, this time tracing lines across her own body. Dissection. She was showing me dissection. She slid back into the water, breathing hard from the exertion. The drawings were already fading as the water dried. She floated there, watching me, waiting for some kind of response. I didn't know what to say. I'd spent 48 years feeding them, observing them, documenting them in secret, but I'd never asked why they hid. I'd assumed it was natural caution, animal instinct. I'd never considered that they might have historical reasons, that they might remember. When? I asked out loud, not expecting her to understand the question. She made the sound sequence again, the same pattern from earlier. Then she dove under and came back up with a piece of kelp. She laid it on the rock and began tearing it into pieces. She made a pile of many pieces, more than I could easily count. Then she pointed at the pile, pointed at the sun, made a gesture that swept from one horizon to the other. Days. She was indicating days, or maybe years, a long time ago, but not so long that she didn't know about it. Not so long that it wasn't still relevant, still frightening. D and F surfaced then, staying back near the channel. A looked at them, made a soft sound, and they approached slowly. C was nowhere to be seen. A turned back to me and made one more drawing. This one was simpler. A small group of mer figures, maybe 5 or 6, separated from a larger group, an arrow showing them moving away. Then just the small group alone, with wavy lines around them indicating water, deep water, isolated water. Survivors. She was showing me survivors who fled and hid. Then she reached up and touched her own chest, pointed at D and F, pointed at the water around the cove. She was telling me that they were the survivors. That this group, this family I'd been feeding for nearly 50 years, they were what remained after humans had hunted their people. The sun was fully up now. The fog had burned off enough that I could see the cliff trail above. I looked up at it, then back at me. She dove under, and D and F followed her. All 3 of them disappeared into the kelp. I sat there for another hour, staring at the rock where she'd drawn. The drawings were completely gone, evaporated in the morning sun, but I could still see every line in my mind. I walked back up the trail slowly. My legs felt weak. I'd been so focused on the biological questions, what they were, how they lived, how they survived. I'd never seriously. For the next week, A continued the lessons. That's what they were, I realized. She was teaching me. The way I might teach a student about marine ecosystems or animal behavior. But her subject was darker. She was teaching me about extinction. April 24th. A brought seaweed to the cove, different types from different depths. She laid them out on the rocks and pointed at each one. Then she made gestures of eating, showed me which ones her people consumed. She drew in the sand again, showing larger kelp forests that no longer existed in this area. She was telling me that their food sources had declined, that the ocean had changed. April 25th. She showed me the effects of temperature. She led me to the north side of the cove where the water was slightly warmer, pooled in shallow areas heated by the sun. She swam into it, then immediately swam back out, making a distressed sound, too warm. She pointed at the ocean beyond, made a rising gesture with her hand. The whole ocean was getting warmer, and they couldn't tolerate it. April 26th. D appeared with fresh wounds on her tail, long, parallel cuts that were still bleeding slightly. A brought her to the shallows and showed me the injuries. She drew in the sand, a boat, nets trailing behind it. D had been caught briefly in a fishing net, had torn herself free, but been injured in the process. The cuts were deep. I could see exposed tissue beneath the scales. I had medical supplies in my pack. I always carried them, had for years, in case I found injured seals or sea lions on the beach. I showed A the supplies: antiseptic, bandages, antibacterial ointment. She watched as I held them up. Then she made a decision. She pushed D toward the rocks where I sat. I climbed down from my rock, moving slowly. D tensed but didn't swim away. I made a soft sound, and D held still. I knelt at the water's edge. D lifted her tail partially out of the water, showing me the wounds. I cleaned them carefully with antiseptic. D flinched but didn't pull away. The cuts were deeper than I'd hoped. 4 parallel lacerations, each about 6 inches long. Monofilament net, probably, with sharp edges where it had frayed. I applied antibiotic ointment, then used waterproof bandaging to cover the worst of it. The bandages wouldn't last long in salt water, but they'd protect the wounds long enough for the ointment to work. D watched me the entire time. When I finished, she made a sound soft and brief. Then she dove under and was gone. A remained. She looked at the medical supplies, then at me. She pointed at D's departing direction, then touched her own shoulder, the old scars there. She was asking if I could have fixed those injuries too, if I'd been there when they happened. Yes, I said, if you'd let me, I could have helped with those too. She floated there, processing this. Decades of injuries that could have been treated if she'd trusted me sooner. But trust took time, and for her people, trusting humans meant death. She'd made the calculation. Better to suffer wounds than risk human contact. April 27th. C still hadn't returned. A drew a single image in the sand. C's larger form, an X through it. She made a sound that carried grief in it. C was gone. Dead. She didn't show me how or why, but from the way she drew it, this had happened recently, within the last few weeks. May brought warmer weather and rougher seas. The cove was harder to access on days when the surf was high. I missed 2 feedings in the first week because the trail was too dangerous to navigate in heavy rain. When I returned on May 8th, A was waiting in the cove, agitated. She made sharp sounds when I appeared, circling the cove quickly. She was upset that I'd missed the scheduled feedings. I threw fish. She took them but didn't eat immediately. She held one, swam to the north end of the cove, and dove down. She was gone for maybe 2 minutes, then resurfaced. She'd cached the fish somewhere underwater. She was storing food now, I realized. She didn't trust that I would be consistent. I couldn't blame her. I'd been consistent for 48 years, but the last 2 weeks had shown me how fragile this arrangement was. I was 68. How much longer could I make this walk every morning? What happened when I couldn't do this anymore? May 9th. A brought something to show me. She carried it in her hands carefully, protecting it as she swam. When she got close to the rocks, she held it up. It was a skull. Small, delicate, definitely not human. The cranial structure was different. The eye sockets were larger, set slightly farther apart. The jaw was elongated, but not as much as a seal's or dolphin's. It was shaped for a face that was part human, part something else. A merperson's skull, a juvenile, based on the size. She placed it on the rock near me. Then she drew in the sand. She showed me a larger group of mer figures, 7 or 8 of them. This was the group that had been in this cove before, the 5 that had become 2. She drew the juveniles among them. Then she drew X marks over several of the figures. Deaths. She pointed at the skull. One of those juveniles. Dead young. She drew more. Some died from injuries. Nets, boats, propellers. Some died from illness. She drew a mer figure lying still. Others gathered around it, unable to help. No medicine, no treatment, no knowledge of how to heal diseases that their population had once been large enough to develop immunity to. One image showed a juvenile born wrong. She drew it carefully, a body that didn't form correctly, that couldn't survive. Genetic problems, I realized. The population was too small, too isolated. Inbreeding depression was setting in. She gathered the skull and dove down with it, taking it back to wherever she'd retrieved it from. When she resurfaced, she looked at me with those dark eyes and made a sound that resonated in the cove. It sounded like mourning. May 12th. D's wounds from the net were healing poorly. The bandages had fallen off after a day, as I'd expected. The cuts were infected now. I could see the inflammation even from my rock, the way the tissue around the wounds was swollen and discolored. D was moving more slowly, favoring the injured tail. I showed A the medical supplies again, more antiseptic, oral antibiotics if D would take them. A considered this. She swam to D, and they had an exchange. Vocalizations, gestures. D was resistant. She didn't want me touching her again, but A was insistent. They approached together. D came close enough for me to reach the wounds. I cleaned them again, applied fresh ointment, tried to show A how to apply it herself. She watched carefully. I gave her the tube of ointment. She took it in one webbed hand, examined it, held it carefully like it was precious. I crushed an antibiotic pill and mixed it with fish. A watched this process too. I threw the medicated fish to D. She ate it without hesitation. I gave A 3 more pills and tried to gesture that D should have 1 per day. A nodded. She understood dosing. She understood treatment. Her people must have had their own medicine once, their own healers, their own knowledge of how to treat injuries and illnesses. That knowledge was gone now. They were dependent on human medicine, on my medicine, to heal wounds caused by human activity. May 15th. F was missing. She hadn't appeared in 5 days. A and D came to the cove, but F wasn't with them. A drew in the sand, F's smaller form, question marks around it. She didn't know where F was. May 16th through May 20th, still no F. A was increasingly distressed. She barely ate the fish I brought. She would take them and immediately dive down, searching. She was spending more time looking for F than feeding. May 21st. A found F. She brought her to the cove, and I saw immediately that something was wrong. F was injured badly. There was a deep wound on her left side, just below her rib cage. The kind of wound that came from something sharp and man-made. A gash maybe 8 inches long, deep enough that I could see layers of tissue beneath the scales. F was barely conscious. She floated on her back, her tail moving weakly to keep her at the surface. A and D supported her on either side. They brought her as close to the rocks as they dared. A looked at me, and in her expression I saw something that broke me. She was begging. She was asking me to save F. I grabbed my entire medical kit and climbed down to the water's edge. The three of them brought F closer. I reached out slowly. I made a soft sound to F, and F didn't pull away when I touched her. The wound was bad, very bad. A puncture wound, probably from a boat propeller or something similar. The edges were ragged. There was still debris in the wound, small fragments of metal or fiberglass. It was already infected, the tissue hot and inflamed. I worked for 2 hours. I cleaned the wound as thoroughly as I could, removed all the debris I could see, flushed it with antiseptic. F made sounds of pain, but A and D held her steady. I used everything I had: antibacterial ointment, pressure bandages, oral antibiotics crushed and mixed with fish. I showed A how to change the dressing, how often to give the medicine. But I knew it wasn't enough. F needed surgery, needed IV antibiotics, needed professional medical care that I couldn't provide, and I couldn't take her anywhere without exposing all of them. A knew it too. I could see it in her face. She looked at F, then at me, and she understood that F was dying. May 22nd, F was worse. The infection had spread. She had a fever, her breathing was labored, she couldn't eat. A and D stayed with her constantly, supporting her, keeping her head above water. May 23rd, F died just after dawn. She simply stopped breathing while A and D held her. A made a sound I will never forget, a wail that echoed off the rocks and carried out over the ocean. D joined her, both of them vocally mourning their loss. They carried F's body to the deep water beyond the cove entrance. I watched them swim out with her, one on each side, supporting her weight. They were taking her somewhere specific, a burial place maybe, a place where they'd taken others who died. They were gone for 3 hours. When they returned, they came back without F. They swam to the cove, but they didn't approach the rocks. They floated in the center, holding each other, their tails intertwined. 2 left. A looked at me across the water. Her expression was devastating. This was my fault, she seemed to say. Not intentionally, not directly, but my species had done this. Humans had put boats in the water, had created propellers, had built the thing that killed F. And humans had hunted her people to the point where there were so few left that losing one juvenile meant losing a significant percentage of their remaining population. I sat on the rock and cried. 68 years old, crying on a beach at dawn because I just watched a young merperson die from an infected wound caused by human technology. Because I'd spent 48 years feeding them, protecting them, documenting them in secret, and it hadn't been enough to save them. It's June now, 3 weeks since F died. A and D still come to the cove, but something has changed. They're slower, more cautious. They don't stay as long. The grief is visible in every movement they make. D's tail wounds healed, finally. The antibiotics worked. But she's thinner than she was. She's not eating enough. The stress of losing F, of losing C before her, it's taking a physical toll. A is old. I see it clearly now in ways I'd been trying not to see for the last few years. She moves more stiffly. Her breathing is heavier after even short exertions. The scars on her body stand out more prominently as she loses body mass. She's been coming to this cove for at least 48 years, probably longer. She was already mature when I first saw her in 1976. She could be 70 years old, 80, even older. I have no idea what the lifespan of her species is in the wild, but she's approaching the end of hers. When she dies, it will be just D. One mer person in this cove, and when D dies, this particular family line will be extinct. A knows this. She's been teaching me their history not just so I understand, but so someone will remember. She's been documenting her species' existence through me, using me as a witness, because she knows that soon there won't be anyone left to tell the story. June 4th. A brought me something. She carried it carefully, wrapped in kelp to protect it. When she got close, she unwrapped it. Inside was a small carved stone. The carving was crude but deliberate. It showed a mer figure, recognizable by the body proportions and tail. Next to it was a human figure. Between them was a fish. She'd made this. She'd found a stone and carved it, probably using sharp rocks or shells, spending hours on this small artifact. She was creating a record of our relationship. Proof that a mer person and a human had worked together, had communicated, had formed something like friendship. She gave it to me. I took it carefully. It's sitting on my desk now, next to 48 years of handwritten logs. June 8th. A showed me one last set of drawings. These were different from all the previous ones. These were about the future, not the past. She drew the ocean, vast and empty. She drew herself and Dee as small figures in that vastness. Then, she drew those figures, fading, disappearing. She drew the ocean empty of mer people entirely. Complete extinction within her lifetime, possibly within the next few years. Then she drew something else. Human figures in boats, covering the ocean. Human structures on the land, spreading. Human activity everywhere. She drew the ocean getting darker, warmer. She drew fewer fish, fewer kelp forests, fewer of everything except humans and their technology. She was telling me that even if her species survived, the ocean wouldn't support them much longer. The ecosystem was collapsing. The waters were too warm, too polluted, too depleted. Her people had survived human hunting hundreds of years ago, but they wouldn't survive what humans were doing to the ocean now. She looked at me with those dark, intelligent eyes, and she asked me again, what comes next? I've been thinking about this question every day since F died. I have a choice to make. I can continue keeping their secret, protecting A and D from discovery, letting them live out their remaining years in peace. That's what they want. That's what A has been asking me to do for 48 years. Or I can tell someone. I can break my silence, contact scientists, marine biologists, conservation organizations. I can try to get protection for them, resources, maybe even attempt to find other survivors and connect isolated populations. I could try to save them, but telling anyone means exposing them. It means bringing attention, bringing cameras, bringing research teams and government agencies and media coverage. It means taking away the secrecy that has kept them alive this long, and A has shown me what happened the last time humans paid attention to her people. I've spent 6 weeks now wrestling with this. I watch A and D in the cove, and I see them slowly declining. I see them mourning F. I see them facing extinction with a kind of quiet dignity that makes my heart ache. And I don't know what the right choice is. If I stay silent, they die in peace, but they die. The knowledge of their existence dies with them. Humanity loses the chance to know that we shared this world with another intelligent species, a species we nearly destroyed, a species we could have learned from. If I speak up, maybe they die anyway. Maybe the attention kills them faster than the ocean would have. Maybe I betray the trust that A gave me when she first accepted fish from my hands in 1976, when she chose to believe that one human could be different. This morning, June 11th, I brought this question to A. I drew in the sand myself for the first time. I drew her and D. I drew myself. Then I drew other humans, many of them. I drew a question mark between these groups. I was asking her permission to tell others. She looked at my drawings for a long time. Then she drew her response. She drew the cove, peaceful and protected. She drew herself and D there, alone except for me. She drew this image with a circle around it. Keep this, she was saying. Protect this. Don't let them find us. Then she drew a different image, the ocean beyond the cove. She drew question marks throughout it, scattered in the depths. Other survivors maybe, somewhere out there. She pointed at these question marks, then at herself, then at me. She made a sound that seemed to carry a meaning I'd learned to recognize. Search, find. She was telling me to look for the others, to try to find other surviving populations, other isolated families like hers, but to keep her and Dee secret, to let them live out their lives hidden and safe. I understand what she's asking. She wants her species to survive if it can, but she's too old and too tired to be part of that survival herself. She's asking me to let her die in peace while searching for others who might still have a chance. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if there are others to find. I don't know if trying to search for them would do more harm than good. I'm 68 years old, a retired marine biologist with no resources and no authority. Who would believe me? And if they did believe me, what would they do with that information? So I sit on this rock every morning, feeding the last 2 merpeople I may ever see, carrying a secret that weighs more with each passing day. A looks at me with trust that I'm not sure I deserve. D watches me with the wariness of someone who knows what humans are capable of, and I bring them fish day after day, the same routine I've maintained for 48 years. The ocean is changing around us. The temperature rises every year. The fish populations shift and decline. The plastics accumulate. The noise increases. The world A knew when she was young is gone, replaced by something hostile and degraded. And she's watching it end, watching her species end, while accepting food from the only human she's ever trusted. I keep detailed logs. I have photographs, though only of the cove, never of them. I have the carved stone. I have 48 years of observations. And I have this story, which I'm writing down now because I need someone else to know. I need the burden of this knowledge to be shared. If you're reading this, I'm making a choice. I'm breaking my silence in a limited way, telling this story, sharing this evidence. I'm not revealing the exact location of the cove. I'm not providing information that would let anyone find A and D. But I'm putting the truth out into the world, hoping that someone will know what to do with it. Hoping that someone will search for the others, if others exist. Hoping that this isn't just a story about extinction, but maybe, somehow, a call to action that comes in time. A is dying, D will follow, the cove will be empty soon, and I'll still walk down that trail every morning, carrying fish to an empty beach, because I won't know how to stop. Because the routine is all I have left of them. Because someone needs to remember that they were here, that they trusted one human despite everything their species had suffered, that they showed me the truth about what we'd done to them. I'm 68 years old. I've kept this secret for 48 years, and I'm telling it now because silence has become impossible. Because A asked me to search for others. Because F died from a wound that human technology caused. Because every morning I look at the ocean and wonder how long it will be before it's completely empty of the extraordinary beings who once called it home. This is my testimony. This is my burden. And this is my question to anyone who hears this story. What do we owe to a species we've nearly destroyed? What responsibility do we carry for their survival? And what should I do with the knowledge that I may be the last human who ever speaks with them? I don't have answers, I only have the routine. The walk to the cove, the fish in the cooler, the wait on the rock. And 2 merpeople who still trust me enough to surface when I arrive, who still accept food from my hands, who still believe that one human can be different from all the others. I hope they're right. I hope I'm worthy of that trust. And I hope that somewhere in the vast Pacific, in some hidden cove I'll never find, others like them still survive.